The restaurant had been buzzing with laughter and the clinking of silverware, a perfect backdrop for a night that should have been about celebration. My son, Dylan, had just graduated high school, a moment he had fought for with years of sleepless nights, AP classes, and a part-time job. We had chosen this steakhouse carefully, splurging for the occasion, because despite everything, I still wanted my parents to be part of this milestone. And then my mother raised her glass, tapped it lightly with her fork, and smiled. I should have known. "We have an announcement," she declared, her voice bright, her posture smug. "We've decided that Dylan's college fund will be going to Jordan instead. He needs it more." Silence. A slow, creeping chill wrapped around my spine. I saw my husband's knuckles tighten around his fork. Dylan's face drained of color. My younger daughter looked between us, confused. My father nodded as if this was some logical, inevitable conclusion. "It's what's best for the family," he added. "Jordan's had a rough time, and this will really help him get back on track." Jordan. My nephew. My brother's son. The boy my parents had always favored. The one they bailed out every time he screwed up. The one who had stolen, wrecked cars, burned through second chances like they were disposable. And now, on one of the most important nights of my son's life, they had decided to erase him. I barely had time to react before Daniel did. He leaned back, slow and casual, took a sip of his beer, and let out a low, amused chuckle. "That's funny." "Honey," he said, eyes glinting, "because we moved it last month." The shift was immediate. My mother's smile vanished. My father's hand curled into a fist on the table. "What?" my mother snapped. Daniel's grin widened. He had been waiting for this. "Yeah," he said, stretching his arms lazily before placing them on the table. "We saw this coming a mile away, so we moved Dylan's college fund out of reach weeks ago, and then everything erupted." "You had no right," my mother screeched, her face turning red. My father slammed his hand on the table so hard the silverware rattled. "That money was meant for family." My pulse pounded in my ears, but I wasn't afraid. I was done. "Dylan is family," I said, my voice steady. "That money was for him. You don't get to decide otherwise." "You're being selfish," my mother spat. "Jordan needs this. Your brother is struggling, and we are fixing things for him, and you're ruining it." There it was. They had never planned for that money to be for Dylan. Not really. They had just been waiting for the right moment to take it. I looked at Dylan. Pure devastation. He had grown up knowing his grandparents favored Jordan, but this was different. This was them telling him to his face that he didn't matter. "Fixing things," I echoed, my voice shaking with rage. "Like when you fixed it last time Jordan stole from us, or when he got arrested and you paid to make it go away, or when he totaled my brother's car and you replaced it like nothing happened." My father growled. "That's not the same thing. Jordan has been struggling. Your brother is a single father doing his best. And I'm a mother doing my best," I cut him off. "And you just told my son, on the most important night of his life, that his future doesn't matter, that you were willing to steal his chance at the life he worked so hard for." My mother scoffed, dismissing it, dismissing him. "Oh, please, Dylan can take out loans like everyone else." And that was the final straw. The chair scraped loudly against the floor as Dylan stood. His voice shook, but his words were strong. "You know what? I don't need anything from you. Not your money, and definitely not you in my life." Daniel stood, placing a firm hand on Dylan's shoulder. His voice was calm, unshaken. "Let's go. We don't owe them another second of our time." And with that we walked away, together. The moment I stood, the weight of years of frustration and disappointment lifted. This was it. This was your last chance, I said, my voice calm but unshakable. You've shown us over and over again exactly who you are. But today, you made sure we'll never forget it. I turned my back on them, and together we walked out. Behind us, chaos erupted. My mother's shrill voice cut through the restaurant, calling us ungrateful. My father bellowed that we were tearing the family apart. But as I looked at Dylan, his head high despite the pain in his eyes, I knew without a doubt we had done the right thing. What I didn't know was just how far my parents would go to get that money back. At first it was just voicemails, endless venomous rants from my mother about how we had betrayed the family. My father's calls were fewer but filled with cold, calculated fury. "You'll regret this," he growled in one. My brother, who had stayed silent that night, finally sent a text 2 days later. "I don't know what's going on, but Jordan needs that money more than Dylan. You're being selfish." No questions, no attempt to understand, just a demand. I didn't even bother replying. Then, things escalated. A week after the dinner, Daniel got a call from the bank while I was in the kitchen. His voice was steady at first, then sharp. "Excuse me, what withdrawal?" I froze. A creeping, sick feeling settled in my stomach. The call lasted another minute, and when Daniel hung up, his face was tight with anger. They tried to access Dylan's fund. My breath hitched. "Who?" Daniel's jaw clenched. "Your parents. They called, pretending to be us, claimed we gave permission for a family emergency withdrawal." I gripped the counter to steady myself. "Did they—" "The bank flagged it," Daniel interrupted. "Said something felt off and called me first." I didn't hesitate. My fingers fumbled as I pulled up my dad's number and hit call. The second he answered, I unleashed everything. "You actually tried to steal from us? What the hell is wrong with you?" He didn't even sound guilty. "You left us no choice," he said coolly. "If you weren't being so unreasonable, we wouldn't have had to." My grip on the phone tightened. Unreasonable. They had tried to commit fraud. "It's our money," he snapped. "No," I seethed. Then my mother's voice cut in, syrupy and insidious. "You think you did all of this on your own? You think we never put anything into that fund?" My entire body went cold. "You never gave a single cent to Dylan's fund, Guiseng," I hissed. "You're remembering wrong," my dad said smoothly. "And if this goes to court, I guarantee they'll agree that we have a right to it." Daniel had been listening, his expression darkening. He stepped closer, voice low and steady. "They don't have a leg to stand on." But I wasn't so sure. My parents were liars, manipulative, and if they were willing to commit fraud, what else were they capable of? 3 days later, we got our answer. I was pulling into the driveway when I noticed a thick envelope sitting on our doorstep. The moment I saw the return address, my stomach dropped. A lawyer's office. My hands shook as I tore it open. The words blurred together as I skimmed the pages, each one hitting me like a punch to the gut. Daniel walked in. "What's that?" I flipped to the next page, barely able to speak. "They're suing us," I whispered. Daniel's head snapped up. "What?" I swallowed hard. "They're claiming they co-funded Dylan's college savings, that we illegally moved the money without their consent." My voice cracked. "They're saying they own part of the fund." Daniel's face darkened. He grabbed the papers, scanning the lines, and then, bang, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor as he stood. Because now, this was war. Daniel's grip on the lawsuit papers tightened, his voice low with fury. "This is complete bullshit." But even as he said it, I could see the doubt flicker in his eyes, because my parents weren't just petty. They were calculated. Twisting reality until they became the victims was their specialty. And if this legal battle turned into a drawn-out fight, I wasn't so sure they wouldn't find a way to win. We spent the next few days in full survival mode, digging up every financial record we had: bank statements, deposit receipts, transfer logs. Anything that would prove Dylan's fund was solely ours. We thought we were prepared. We thought logic and facts would win. Then, my parents dropped their bombshell. At the next meeting with our lawyers, they sat there smugly as their attorney slid a decade-old receipt across the table. A single deposit of $2,000 made when Dylan was just a baby. This, their lawyer announced, proves their contribution to the fund, giving them standing to contest its use. For a second, I just stared at the paper. Then I laughed. $2,000. You think that gives you control over the entire fund? My mother's fake sweet smile was infuriating. It was a contribution, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. Without it, you wouldn't have had the foundation to save as much as you did. I felt rage surge up like a tidal wave, but Daniel, thank God for Daniel, kept his composure. He leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and said coolly, "So, let me get this straight. You gave a one-time gift over a decade ago, and now you think you have the right to control where the money goes?" My father didn't even hesitate. Exactly. I could have screamed. The lawsuit dragged on for weeks. And while the court ruled they had no claim to the fund itself, we were still forced to pay them back their $2,000. With interest. It felt like a loss. Not because of the money, but because it sent a clear message. My parents were willing to go to any length to punish us for saying no. And they weren't done yet. Not even 2 weeks later, Daniel walked into the house, his face pale. "They reported us," I blinked. "What?" "To the IRS." My stomach dropped. "They're claiming we committed tax fraud." I stopped breathing. My parents had told the IRS we were hiding assets, misreporting funds, and had been doing so for years. I clutched the edge of the counter. "This is insane." "Yeah," Daniel said grimly. "And now we're under investigation." That was the breaking point. I had thought the lawsuit was the worst of it. I thought losing a chunk of money to my greedy, self-righteous parents was as bad as it could get. I was wrong, because when the IRS showed up at our doorstep, I realized my parents weren't just trying to take money. They were trying to ruin us. It started with a letter, a cold, formal notice that we were under financial review due to an anonymous report of tax discrepancies. Daniel read it first. He exhaled sharply and handed it to me without a word. I scanned the letter, my hands shaking. "This can't be real." Daniel muttered, "Oh, it's real." Then came the phone call. A polite but firm IRS agent explained that an anonymous tip had flagged us for hidden assets and fraudulent fund transfers. We knew who was behind it, but proving it, that was another story. For the next few weeks, we drowned in paperwork, pulling years of tax records, bank statements, anything that could clear our names. Luckily, our finances were clean, but the investigation wasn't just about money. The worst part? It froze Dylan's financial aid. His college flagged his account due to the IRS review, putting an immediate hold on his scholarship disbursements. My parents hadn't just tried to steal his college fund. They tried to take his future. That was it. If they wanted war, I was about to bring them hell. And my first move? Exposing their secrets. Because if there was one thing I knew for sure, my parents had skeletons. And it was time to start digging. If they wanted to play dirty, they had no idea just how ugly I could get. My parents had spent years presenting themselves as the financial backbone of the family. Responsible, untouchable, always in control. But what they didn't realize was that Daniel knew their secrets. Years ago, he had helped them set up a small rental property investment, handling all their paperwork, tax filings, and financial records. And guess what? They had been underreporting rental income for over a decade. They thought they were untouchable. Turns out, they were just careless. I didn't report them. Not yet. First, I decided to warn them, give them a taste of what it felt like to have the ground crumble beneath their feet. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring, her tone dripping with condescension. "Oh, so you're finally ready to apologize?" I almost laughed. "Number, I'm calling to let you know that I found the real tax fraud in this family." Silence. Then a scoff. "What are you talking about?" "Your rental income, the money you conveniently forgot to report for the last 15 years. I heard the sharp hitch in her breath, the crack in her confidence. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," I said, voice cold as ice. "And so will the IRS, unless you drop this nonsense and call off the dogs." Her tone shifted instantly. "You wouldn't," I smiled. "Try me." She hung up without another word. 2 days later, we got a call from the IRS. Our case? No longer a priority. A week after that, Dylan's college fund was suddenly unfrozen. My parents had backed off. For now. But I knew them. They wouldn't let it end like this. And I was right. It happened late at night. Daniel and I were dead asleep when the sound of shattering glass jolted us awake. For a second, I thought I was dreaming. Then, footsteps. Inside the house. Daniel moved immediately. He grabbed the baseball bat from beside the bed, already motioning for me to call 911. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone. Then I heard the voice. "Mom? Dad? Dylan." Panic shot through me. He was awake. He had heard the noise, and instead of staying put, he was coming downstairs. "Stay in your room," Daniel shouted. Too late. We stepped into the hallway just as Dylan reached the stairs, and that's when we saw him. Jordan, standing in our living room, drunk, eyes wild and desperate, holding a crowbar. For a split second, no one moved. Then Jordan took a shaky step forward, his voice slurred with rage. "Where is it?" Daniel's grip on the bat tightened. "Where's what?" "The money," Jordan growled, his voice breaking. "I deserve it. They promised it to me." That's when it hit me. My parents sent him. They knew they couldn't touch the money legally. They knew they had lost. So they sent their precious grandson to do their dirty work. Jordan staggered toward us, raising the crowbar slightly. "You think you can just take what's mine?" Dylan stepped forward, his fists clenched, his voice steady. "It was never yours." Jordan laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "Oh, yeah. And what are you going to do about it?" That's when Daniel swung the bat. Not at Jordan, at the wall. Hard. The crack of impact echoed through the house. Jordan stumbled back, eyes wide. Whatever drunken courage had been fueling him snapped in an instant. He turned on his heel and bolted out the front door. The police arrived 10 minutes later. Jordan was arrested for attempted burglary. And my parents? They bailed him out before the sun even came up. Then, as if they hadn't already destroyed every last shred of my patience, my mother had the audacity to call me. "You've gone too far," she hissed. I almost laughed. "He broke into our home with a weapon. That's on you." She was silent for a long moment. Then a whisper. "You'll regret this." And for the first time, I truly believed she meant it. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He wanted to meet. "It's gone too far," my brother said over the phone, his voice worn down, laced with something that almost sounded like regret. "Mom and Dad are a mess. Jordan's a mess. We need to talk." I nearly laughed at the audacity. Now he wanted to talk, After standing by while our parents tried to rob Dylan of his future, after watching them manipulate Jordan into doing their dirty work. But Daniel convinced me. Maybe this is our chance to end it, he said, to finally get real answers. Against my better judgment, we agreed. The family meeting was set for Sunday. Their house felt like a battlefield before a war. Dylan refused to come. I'm done with them, he said simply. And I didn't blame him. My parents were already seated when we arrived, stiff and unyielding. My mom's face was drawn, her lips pressed into a thin, stubborn line. My dad, arms crossed, wouldn't even look at us. The weight of their betrayal sat heavy between us, unspoken but undeniable. Then my brother walked in, with Jordan trailing behind. The sight of him made me tense immediately. He looked awful, gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, none of his usual arrogance left. He looked lost. My mom gestured toward the couch, but I stayed standing. Let's get this over with. My brother sighed. Look, we all screwed up. Daniel scoffed. We screwed up? I didn't mean it like that, my brother said quickly. I mean, this isn't what Mom and Dad wanted. A bitter laugh escaped me. They wanted to steal from my son. They wanted to use Jordan to break into our house. So please, tell me, what exactly did they not want? That's when Jordan spoke. His voice was rough, hoarse. I didn't mean to hurt anyone, he muttered. I thought it was mine. The words made my stomach drop. You thought it was yours, I repeated slowly. Why? Jordan swallowed hard, his eyes flicking to my mother. And that's when I saw it. The guilt, the sheer dread in her expression. Daniel caught it too. He leaned forward, voice deceptively calm. Tell us, Jordan, why did you think it was yours? Jordan hesitated, his gaze darting between my mother and my father. That's when it clicked. My breath caught. Oh my God. I turned to my mother, my voice barely a whisper. You told him, didn't you? She flinched. I turned back to Jordan, my heart pounding. They told you it was already yours, didn't they? That Dylan's fund wasn't just being given to you, but that it was always meant for you. Jordan's face paled, his hands clenched into fists. He looked trapped, torn between what he wanted to believe and the truth staring him in the face. My mother spoke before he could. We had to, she snapped, voice desperate. He was struggling. Your brother was struggling. We had to give him hope. I felt sick. So you lied to him. My voice rose. You let him believe his entire future was secured with money that was never his. My father finally spoke, his voice sharp as a knife. What does it matter? You had plenty. You and Daniel have good jobs, a house, a stable life. Jordan had nothing. He shook his head in disgust. What kind of sister are you to sit by while your own nephew suffered? Something snapped. I stepped forward, hands shaking with rage. What kind of parents are you? My voice was ice, razor sharp. You have 2 children, but you've spent your entire lives treating me like a second-class citizen, while I gestured at my brother, who looked ready to shrink into the couch, got everything handed to him, and now you expect me to just give away my son's future because of your guilt? My mother shot to her feet. We did what we had to do. No, I hissed, stepping even closer. You did what you always do. You chose him over me, and this time you got caught. Silence. Jordan was shaking his head, his expression crumbling. You lied to me? He whispered, staring at my mom as if seeing her for the first time. Jordan, she reached for him, but he backed away. No, you promised me. His breathing became erratic. For the first time, my mother looked scared, because her favorite, her golden boy, was slipping away, and for once, there was nothing she could do to stop it. You swore I wouldn't have to worry about college, that I was set. Jordan's voice wavered as he looked between them, searching for something, an excuse, an explanation, a lie that might make this betrayal easier to swallow. But when his gaze landed on my father, all he got was silence, cold, hollow. And that silence? It was answer enough. Jordan let out a shaky laugh, the sound sharp and bitter, like he was laughing at his own stupidity. Then he turned to me. His mouth opened, but for a second, nothing came out. Then, barely above a whisper, His voice broke. I'm sorry. And for the first time, I saw it, the weight of the truth crashing down on him, the realization that he had been nothing more than a pawn in my parents' twisted game, the regret of knowing he had stood on the wrong side for far too long. Without another word, he turned and walked out. I didn't stop him. My parents, however, weren't done. They ranted, they raved, they called me ungrateful. They accused me of tearing the family apart, as if they weren't the ones who had set fire to it in the first place. They spun excuse after excuse, trying to justify the unjustifiable. I let them talk, and when they finally ran out of breath, I met their eyes. Two people who had given me life but never truly loved me the way parents should, and I said the only thing that mattered. We're done. And this time, I meant it. My brother reached out once, months later. He apologized, admitted he had let things go too far, that he had believed our parents' lies for too long, that he should have fought harder for me. But some wounds don't heal with words alone. I wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe I never would be. Jordan, though, he surprised me. He stayed out of trouble after that, got a job, took classes at a community college. Whether it was guilt, shame, or genuine wake-up call, I'll never know. But I hoped, for his sake, that he had finally learned. As for Dylan, he went to college, his college, the one he had earned. And my parents? They never saw a dime of that money. They never saw us again either. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. Cutting off your own parents, even ones who never truly loved you, is a kind of grief, like mourning someone who is still breathing. But sometimes it's better to bury the past than let it keep cutting you open. And me? I chose to live.